Hello, folks. Welcome to the very first edition of the Straightforward Farming Podcast. I am your host, Tony Reed, otherwise known as Growing Corn 2020 on TikTok. This is the virgin run for us. I don't know how this is going to turn out, so bear with us, and we'll see what happens. I'm joined today with a good friend of mine, Nick McCormick. He goes as in McCormick 1466 on TikTok, and you're going to be hearing a lot out of Nick. He's been a friend of mine since kindergarten, lives a mile or two down the road now. We spend a lot of time drinking beer together, running around. Our kids play together. So, we're going to have Nick help us out a lot. You're going to be hearing a lot from him, I think, as we move along here. So, Nick, without further ado, tell us about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Well, first off, thanks for having me, Tony. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to it. Quick background on me. Like I said, you and I have been friends since kindergarten. We're the same age. Grew up, here in South Central Illinois. Family's farmed my whole life. We farm now, run a diesel repair business, do a little tractor pulling, work on some tractor pulling stuff, high performance side of things, and farm repair. Went to the University of Illinois, graduated in 2002, been farming and working ever since.
Cool. Yep, that's good. That's so what's one of the things that you have learned from TikTok? So I've been on TikTok longer than you, but which not by much. I've been on there a little less than a year. You've probably been on there 3-4 months, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I basically started off just to kind of watch your stuff and support you, to be honest with you. Really didn't have any grand visions of ever posting anything or whatnot. But you hate to keep watching and not actually post some stuff or whatever. I'd say the biggest thing I've learned from TikTok is, one, some people have a lot of time on their hands, but two, it's very interesting to see how other people live. Take, for instance, Montana or Farmer 75.
Right.
I don't know anything about barley in Montana.
Right.
I'm far from an expert now, but I know more now than I did.
Yeah, exactly.
And, it's just interesting to see how, with Chuck Weldon with the hog issues in the barns and this, that, and the other,
Right.
I'm not intricately involved in raising pigs or barley.
Right.
So it's neat to see other things that other farmers are doing that we're kind of in you're in a little bit of a vacuum in your home area.
Right.
Around here we know corn and soybeans and a little bit of wheat.
Right.
Outside of that, we don't have any specialty crops unless they're in your garden.
Right.
Exactly. On a very small scale. So it's interesting to see how other people grow different crops on a large scale.
Right, exactly. And I'll tell you one thing that we take for granted here in Central Illinois is how it really is one of the best places in the world to farm. We get adequate rainfall. We have good soil, big square fields, no rocks. I mean, it really is a nice place to farm. And I was talking to a guy out of southern Missouri here. It's probably been a month ago. He came up to Barker Implement in Shelbyville to buy a field cultivator. He's with a buddy that was buying a field cultivator. And he got to talking about irrigation where he's at. And it's like, holy shit. I mean, that comes at a major price. You don't just flip the switch on that deal and walk away from it and you got 200 bushel corn. I mean, that is a full-time job once the irrigators start. And I mean, it sounds like a giant pain in the ass almost.
Absolutely. Where my wife's from in Illinois, they irrigate, one of the few spots in Illinois that has irrigation. And when I go up there, it's like, wow, so you're going to do that? That looks like a lot of work all the time. And the benefits are good, and they can't grow crops without it. But I got some friends in Nebraska that irrigate a lot. That's a full-time job.
Oh, absolutely.
Above and beyond farming. You could have two guys just working on center pivot stuff from what little bit I know about it.
Right.
And then you see the corners of the field and there's nothing. And it's like, wow, that without the water, they literally have nothing.
Yeah, nothing at all. And it's crazy because that guy in Missouri was telling me, I and don't quote me on all this because it's been a while back now, but if one of his big pivots took 24 hours to make a revolution, basically that was putting on, I'm going to say, an inch of water. So it took an hour or a day to make a revolution. Once one of them pumps goes down or a motor goes down, I mean, it is all hands on deck because the soil was sandy and it's so hot that once you get behind, you'll never catch up.
Never catch up.
And it's just crazy to think about that. Around here, we plant a crop, you walk away from it, you come back in the fall and you harvest, and that's it. I mean,
my wife always makes the comment where she's from. inch of rain in the morning, turn the pivots on at noon.
Yeah.
You know, that's just how it is there because of the sand and the heat,
Yeah.
this, that, and the other. If you don't, like you say, you can't catch up.
Yeah. When we were cutting wheat out in Nebraska, when I was on the harvest crew, them guys always called it chasing water, and they were flood irrigation there, so they had the big, I don't know what you would call it, the trenches down through the field, you know, that they flooded, and they always called it chasing water. They'd take off at 5 o'clock in the morning with a shovel because you had to make sure nothing was dammed up or nothing blew out anywhere, and they would literally work. Well, they'd work till the heat of the day, noon or whatever. They would stop. Then in the heat of the day, they would go to the house, do whatever, and then that evening they'd take back off with a shovel. And it's just like, God damn, that would just, that's not my cup of tea, I guess.
We're very fortunate in that regard. You know, you talk about the rocks and whatnot. We were at a poll one time. The guy was talking about, he was from Ohio, and he was telling a buddy of mine and myself that they had a lot of rocks in their field they were picking up or whatever. My buddy's like, well, rocks? Who put them there?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, God did, you know, thousands of years ago. He's like, well, man, don't you have them all picked up by now? And he's like, well, no, new ones surface all the time. And, you know, but he's from central Illinois, north of here, in the really good black dirt.
Right.
No idea that rocks existed in fields just randomly.
Exactly.
You know?
And I mean, to you and I, God's honest truth, if you're going through the field and you see a rock that's, you know, maybe the size of a softball or a little bigger, odds are you're going to stop and pick it up. It's like, God, we don't want to hit that. And you get in the Dakotas and places, they're like, that ain't nothing. I mean, you farm right over that. Yeah. That's nothing. I mean, they're talking rocks the size of my kitchen table. It's like, God.
Yeah, those small ones, they'll just turn a roller over and roll them back in the ground. They ain't worth getting off for.
Yeah, it's just insane. And that's what's so cool about the agriculture in this country. It is so diversified with the crops and with the land, and just the whole gamut is just a totally different aspect from the East Coast to the West Coast. I mean, it just...
Yeah, like I said, you know, we're living a little bit of a vacuum in the fact that, you know, when you think farmer, at least when we think farmer, we think corn and soybeans, but there's so much more to that.
Right.
And, you know, we're fortunate and probably unfortunate in the same regard. We're fortunate in the fact that we don't have to diversify into a bunch of other crops.
Right.
At least at current trends.
Right.
But by the same token, those guys spread their risk out and the reward with all those other crops that you really, I don't know if you couldn't grow them here or not, or you can't or not, you know.
Right, that's what I've always wondered. So taking this, I mean, I guess you could throw out maybe our climate, maybe that could have something to do with it. But as far as rainfall, where we're not irrigating, you know, why was cotton never a crop in Illinois? Or, I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't 200 years ago, but, you know, it's never, I mean, my grandpa, my great-grand, I mean, going way back, never raised cotton.
No.
And it's just weird how them markets...
And you don't have to go very far to find cotton.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You drive to Missouri in the corner here, there's cotton.
Yeah.
Not which is 2 hours from here at the most, you know.
Right.
And there's cotton there. Like I said, there's no cotton here.
No.
To my knowledge, never has been. Tobacco is the other thing. Not that I'm dying to get, that looks like a lot of work too.
Right.
But, you know, you get into Kentucky, Tennessee.
Right.
Bam, tobacco.
Yep.
You go to Wisconsin. I've got some friends that grow tobacco up there. At least they used to up until recently.
Right.
And we're this huge, long state in the middle. Yeah. And I don't know anybody in Illinois that's ever grown tobacco.
Exactly.
You know?
And really, it's never diversified in our immediate area. And I'm going to say within, I mean, you probably back me up, but within a 100-mile circle of where we live, it is corn, soybeans with a little bit of wheat mixed. But I mean, there was never sunflowers or, I mean, you know, they talk about them crops out west, you know, lentils and, you know, whatever else, chickpeas. Now, I do know there is some vegetables in Illinois, the largest pumpkin producing state in the nation, which I don't know where the hell they're growing at because I've never fucking seen pumpkins anywhere.
There's a lot of pumpkins north on 57, like in the Kankakee area, I think.
Really?
You'll see some up there, or at least I've seen a pretty good patch up there. And then a lot of those vegetable crops are in like Mason County. They don't grow as many now as they did, but I think there's still a lot of green beans, a lot of sweet corn, a lot of popcorn.
Really?
Well, Weaver used to have, I assume it's still there, a large facility over that way for popcorn. And I know there was a ton of specialty crops there, like
I'll be darned.
Like green beans being the main one.
Right. I'll be darned. Yeah, that's just one of them things. I mean, it has been corn and soybeans with a little bit of wheat mixed in around here for as long as I can remember. Now, I guess maybe the high corn prices, you know, 10 years ago or whatever, or 2012, whatever it was, shut a lot of that off. Because when I was a kid, there was a fair amount of Milo raised around here. In fact, my grandpa used to raise it. But
we used to raise it. Man, I'm glad we don't raise it anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, even down around Farina, I mean, you know, 30, 40 miles south of us, there used to be a lot when I was a kid. I mean, it's gone. I mean, you don't see nothing anymore.
Yeah, and I assume corn prices, you know, sheer economics, got rid of some of that. But to be honest with you, I don't know where you take a bushel of Milo now.
Right, exactly.
You know, when we were kids, every elevator took Milo.
Right.
Now, I suspect you'd drive a ways if you just want to get rid of it.
I'm assuming, yeah. So the last time we raised it, That was when I was working for another farmer there at Shelbyville. We raised some one year, and we hauled it direct to St. Louis and put it on a barge.
Yeah.
So, yep. But I don't know. What do you think on some of this farm equipment nowadays? I mean, where do you see this going as a diesel mechanic? I mean, what's your thoughts on some of this stuff?
Well, I think we're in a very unique time. You know, you grew up same time I did. Everybody loves 4020s, 1066s, you know, the older stuff or whatnot. Every farm still has one or two of those on it.
Right.
Okay, and those things 30, 40 years old now.
Yep.
You know, whatever they are. You might still have an M, you might still have this, that, and the other. I don't think you'll see this new stuff ever last that long.
Right.
You know, we can't keep the emission stuff working on it now.
Right.
When it's brand new,
right?
Let alone 15, 20 years from now. You know, I always made the joke when the 8400 series John Deere came out that I told a buddy of mine, I'm like, well, that'll be great till a mouse gets in there.
Right.
He's like, well, same thing that happened to a Magnum. I'm like, that takes a big mouse to eat linkage.
Right.
You
exactly.
know, once everything's fly by wire, well, one mouse problem can cause you $15,000 worth of wiring harnesses later, if you can still get them once that tractor gets very old and you've got a huge issue.
Right.
So as hard a time as they have keeping all these sensors working when the stuff's brand new and still under warranty, I see that being a huge issue going forward. You know, the tractor you gave $200,000-300,000 for, you know, you've had it on the farm. It's got 4,000 hours now, 5,000 hours. It's 10, 15, 20 years old.
Right.
Will it even start and run, or you just shove it in a fence row? Does that become, you recycle that for parts and it goes into the scrap bin? I mean, that gets pretty expensive if you start throwing away stuff that new when you're 40-20. If you can shake the wheel and get your ether can jammed in, it will still start and you can use it, you know.
Exactly. Right. And it's even, you know, I know all the value of the dollar, all that plays into it. But, you know, back then, take a 40-20, for example. You could buy one new for, between $6,000 and $9,000 from start to finish, you know, whatever it was. So now it's worth double that.
Yeah.
Where you're not going to do that on a tractor nowadays. I mean, you're not going to buy it for $300,000, run it for fucking 15 years and sell it for $6,000. I mean,
my dad always told me when he was still selling for IH, I think the first 1066s sold for like $9,250.
Yep.
And the last ones were $46,000 and some.
Is that
and
right?
That was from 71 to 76.
Holy cow.
That's how fast stuff went up in the 70s.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So, you know, everybody talks about resale. Well, 1066s will sell for more than they did new.
Yeah.
From the first few years, you know, obviously they're not bringing over 46 now.
Right.
But, you know, it's just interesting to see how that stuff goes. I don't think you're going to see, like you said, that carry on going forward.
Yeah, I had no idea 1066 was that expensive at the end of the series. I didn't realize
by the end, but I mean everything. The 70s, when we look at land in the 70s,
right,
it was doing the same thing. You know, what guys were buying for $1,000 in 1972 was you know, hit $3,000 somewhere in there, around here anyway.
Yep.
You know, and then the 80s came and
then
it sold for $900.
Yep. And I guess the funny part too is take a 1460 International Combine. And yeah, if a big farmer back then had one and ran it for 4,000 hours, think of the acres that he put through it in 4,000 hours, but take an S790 now and have 4,000, and look at the acres that thing's ran. I mean,
and that's the deceiving thing about combine hours in general. You know, back then nobody unloaded on the go.
Right.
You know, and they only had an hour meter. They didn't have hours for the separator.
Right.
So, you know, a 4,000 hour machine, if you look at one today, it's got 4,000 separator hours. It's got 2,700, 3,000 engine, or, you know, 4,000 engine hours, 2,700 separator hours. Well, that had to be way worse even back then.
Right, exactly.
And so you really need to look at bushels that have came through the machine, which the monitor keeps track of now.
Right.
You know, which you didn't have that luxury back then. And the other thing that's a super, super big factor in that nobody takes into consideration for the most part is the speed at which that crop comes through.
Exactly.
You know, bushel's a bushel, but you know, you run your auger at a dead idle and run a million bushels through it.
Right.
Unloading a bin, and then run a million bushels through it at wide open throttle, you know, PTO speed, and see which auger works better at the end of the day.
Right.
The speed has a ton to do with it. I know certain brands of machinery that they've sped up the unloading system on. It was the same unloading system as the previous model,
right?
But they sped it up. Now they're wearing grain tanks out,
right?
Exactly. Which they've never had that problem before, but they're turning the augers faster and it wears it out quick. So it's a little deceiving there on how much that is. But you know, you think back, it's like, man, that 1460 was huge,
right?
You know, what a massive machine.
Yep.
And the, you know, guy got by farming his however many acres back then. Now one combine can do in an hour, bushel-wise, what that took that guy all morning to do, you know, from a bushel standpoint.
Right.
And we grow better crops now, too, so you have the opportunity to bring more bushels in. But,
right. Right. Yeah, it all factors in, and it kills me too how the mindset of the farmer has changed too, as far as, you know, you could get a 12-row corn head on an 8820 back then. And I mean, if you had mentioned that to somebody now, you know, they would just look at you like you got four heads. It's like, you would never run a 12-row on something like that. It's like they were actually capable of, you know, I don't know when what was the first 12-row on an IH combine? Probably a 1680?
No, you couldn't get an IH made 12-row till 23s, I believe.
Oh, really?
2388s. And you had to have the third lift cylinder and a weight package for that. And there wasn't very many 12-rows at that, I don't think.
Yeah.
But like you said, farming's so much different now than it was then. You know, the window was bigger. You know, when we were kids, you didn't plant in mid-April.
Right.
If you started planting in April at all, it was a pretty good year. You know, and it took forever.
Yep.
You know, you planned for a month, it seemed like. If you were done, you start 1st of May. If you were done by June, that was great.
Yeah.
Harvest was the same way.
Yep.
You know, and the elevator stayed open until 10 o'clock.
Right.
And, you know, come through. Now the elevator's closed at 5.
Right.
But you get done a month sooner than you used to.
Yep. Exactly.
You know?
That's been the humongous bottleneck around here is the elevators have not updated with the times. You know, it's still the same 300 bushel pit that you're dumping it. They built more bins, but you can't get it out of the pit into the bin any quicker than what you used to. There's been a few upgrades, but I mean, you know, back then, when we were kids, everybody hauled with wagons, and I mean fucking everybody. Yeah. You know, you'd see a little, you know, 2-ton grain truck every now and again.
Every once in a while.
But now, I mean, it's semis or nothing. I mean, wagons are completely obsolete in this area. In fact, on our farm, personally, we're probably the only ones that still haul with straight trucks. I mean, we don't have a semi, and I mean, people just look at you like you got two heads, and they can't believe it. But.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the improvements that the farmer has made, you know, we'll take our local area, like you said, and I'm not knocking the grain elevators by any stretch of the imagination because that stuff's all expensive.
Right.
I get it. But, you know, essentially the grain elevators in our area are similar to what they were when we had a 715 and a 4-row.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, well, now, like you said, you've got big combines now, semis, you can bring it in fast, this, that, and the other.
Right.
And it bottlenecks it up. Now, by that same token, farmers have built a lot more bins since then, so a lot of it gets stored on the farm, and then you haul it off later.
Right.
But it's tough to keep up with that trend, and they're getting by, and they don't necessarily have to.
Right.
But
it's funny when you look 2 miles up the road here, you got a family that, you know, in the 70s run a grain elevator, and then there was one north of Strasburg, a local family. Yeah. And you drive by them today, and it's even a small setup for a farming operation now, and that was an elevator when we were kids. It's like, God, I mean, there's guys that are building bigger single bins than what their entire grain system holds.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and back then they had a semi and some sort of trailer, and they could more than keep up with the guy with an 8-in Ford and 2 little giant wagons, you know, that was coming in every 2 hours. You know?
It's funny because, well, they're both dead and gone now, but I don't know if you remember old Gaylord and Gleason Reagan. There was 2 old guys that lived up by where I farm. They were older than the hills. 2 bachelors, brothers, never been married, lived together their whole life. And their big thing in the fall was they would go out behind everybody's combine in the field, and they'd pick up corn on the cob, you know, and they'd carry it in 5-gallon buckets and dump it in their truck, and that's what they'd feed their cows all winter. And I'll never forget, it was probably about 2005, 2006. I was talking to Gleason at the restaurant one day, and he'd been picking up corn, and we was talking about, you know, farm machinery and this and that, and he told me then, he said, boy, an old cow just starved to death behind one of these new combines. It's like, he was just so impressed at how they just don't leave nothing anymore.
They don't live near what they did, and, you know, poly corn heads have had a lot to do with that. You know, I remember showing with an old steel corn head, and it's like, every time the biggest ear in the field, it seemed like, you'd see it come in, tink, and off it'd go. It's like, man. And then there'd be one that always sat on the hood. It'd just sit there right on the hood of the corn head, and you just watch it. And you're like, oh, it'll fall in here eventually. Nope, another ear would hit it, chunk it out. And it's like, it was the best ear in the whole field.
I tell you, I have always been mesmerized with combines, even since I was a little kid. And, you know, I remember, you know, when a 9600 John Deere come out, sitting in the cab of one of them or looking through the brochures, and I mean, just in utter disbelief. I mean, 2 seats in this thing. I mean, this thing was just massive, you know. It's like, I just don't see how combines would ever get any bigger or better than this. I mean, that's a tinker toy now. Yeah. But it is just mind-boggling the amount of, you know, running a 40-foot draper at 5 mile an hour. I mean, that is a lot of material coming through a machine. I mean, it is flat amazing what they will do.
You can get more done with one of those. And if, when we were kids growing up, if you went to the coffee shop and got everybody in there and put all their combines together, wouldn't equal what that one will do now.
Yeah, exactly.
But by that same token, back then, everybody that's at that coffee shop could buy a new one.
Right.
And get it paid for.
Exactly.
And now we don't know anybody that's buying a brand new one.
Right. Yeah, that's funny how that's changed, because when I was a kid, it seemed like somewhere along the line, everybody bought a new tractor or two. They didn't do it all in 1 year, but I mean, anybody, when I was 10 years, so let's say the mid 80s, if you had a farmer that was 50 years old, he probably had at least one new tractor on his farm and probably bought another new one sometime before he retired, But now, and then, that guy might have only farmed 500 acres.
Yeah.
And now it's like, you don't have guys farming 500 acres that are buying new tractor. I mean,
absolutely not. But the other thing that factors into that is, back then, there were no used tractors to be had because tractors, truthfully, were fairly new.
Right.
Wasn't that many years you had to go back and there was horses.
Yeah.
And stuff had gotten enough bigger. It's like, well, I can either buy a new 1466 or I can maybe find a 560 or an M that's for sale.
Right.
But there wasn't that much on the market. We didn't have the ability to look on the internet and find one in, 3 states away.
Right.
So you had to go to your 2 local dealers.
Yep.
It had to be something you were going to drive home because Lord knows you weren't paying to have it trucked.
Right.
If you could even find a truck that could haul it.
Right.
So there's some factors in there that play into that. And like I said, stuff wasn't near as expensive. Like farm ground back then. I mean, how many guys did you hear of that, started with nothing? Their dad might have farmed, but they went out on their own.
Right.
They bought 500, maybe 1,000 acres by the time they were done. Might not even farmed it all.
Right.
Rented some of it out, got it all paid for, and now guys our age, if you get 80 acres bought in your lifetime, you're doing pretty good. And our kids.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally going to take you, if I bought 80 acres right now, let's lowball, let's say $8,000 an acre. I would literally be retirement age by the time it was paid for.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, and then truthfully, if you wanted to run the numbers, it would never pay for itself.
No,
I mean, never.
But it never has, truthfully. I mean, you're always banking on it going up. But yes, that's exactly right. It's a totally different environment now. Farming, it's like dairy farming is always one of those things. If you weren't born into it, you're never going to get into it.
Right.
Grain farming is getting to be that way. If you're not born into it in some fashion, well, you're probably not getting into
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
You're not just going to decide one day like you could in 1965 and say, hey, I'd like to grow corn and soybeans. I think I'll be a farmer.
Exactly.
You can't do that now.
I would give if you could give me a point in time in life to ever go back to and live, I think the 1940s and 50s in through there would have been neat because you were starting to get some technology, some modernization. You weren't doing everything by hand. Things were affordable. You could live on 160 acres, raise a family. I think that'd have been cool to live during them time. And I'm sure it probably sucked. I mean, but to me, looking back, it would have been.
I'm sure as they got older, they're like, man, remember how bad it sucked when we were kids? But they had to work all the time, no doubt, and it was tough work, hard work. That's also why those guys were twice as tough as you and I will ever be.
Exactly.
But it would have been neat. That's what I always tell my dad. I'm like, you were born at the perfect time. I'm like, you had, the coolest cars.
Right.
You could do whatever you wanted.
Yep.
Nobody was hounding you about this, that, and the other.
Right.
You had good tractors.
Yep.
All the way up.
Yep.
It was just born at a good time.
Yeah, it was. I've always been fascinated with that era of time in there. And I used to think about my grandma a lot. She was 97 when she died. She was born in 1917. She died in 2013. But the amount of stuff that she's seen in her entire life was just she was a decent age by the time the Depression hit.
Yeah.
And lived through World War II, Korea, Vietnam. I mean, all this major stuff. And I'll never forget, she talked about the first time they ever seen an airplane. They were just in, because you didn't see that on the nightly news because you didn't have the TV or the nightly news. And it's like, what in the hell is this thing? They had heard about them, but it's one thing to hear about this mechanism that flies through the air, but to actually see one, it's like, holy shit, And I'll never forget, she always talked about her dad, which, he would have been born, I'm going to guess, in the 1860s, 70s, sometime in there, roughly. And she always talked about the first time he ever drove a car. He drove it right through the woodshed at the end of her property, and she said the entire time he was jerking on his steering wheel, yelling, "Whoa, you son of a bitch! Whoa!" He was so used to, he never drove a car. He was used to horses, and run her through the garage.
That's funny. My grandma was the same way. She was 99, and it's like the amount of stuff that she saw. She hated horses with a passion because when she grew up farming, they had horses.
Yeah.
And when they got tractors, she was done with the horses. She was glad to see them go. Those were not a fun animal. Those were not recreational.
Right.
Those were work. And they were work after you got done with the work because you still had to take care of them,
It makes you wonder, where did all these horses go? Because, there was a point in time where they were getting traded in for tractors. Yeah. I mean, you would have thought the horse market would have been flooded at some point in time, because it's like, the dealer takes these in. What the hell's he doing with them?
I suppose it's just like taking in an 8230,
I guess.
Because a guy wants an 8250.
Yeah.
There's somebody else will take it down the line. There's still some people that
right.
wanted those horses worse than they wanted their horses.
Yeah. Or one, who wants one of them tractors? You'll just be working on it, or whatever. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, horses die, so you're good there. I guess they're going to go away eventually.
Yeah, it does baffle me, though. I mean, because we've talked for a long time, though, that machinery cannot physically get any bigger. You'll never get it up and down the roads. And that's why everything's going faster now. Planters, combines, I mean, just everything. And it makes you wonder where that'll stop. I mean, right now, we're shitting our pants over 10 mile an hour. It may be 20 mile an hour by the time my kids are, I don't know.
You look at planters, and okay, we got to 24, went to 36, 48, and then we realized, holy cow, what am I going to do with this used 48-row planter? Because farmer B, he can't afford to rebuild it.
Right.
He doesn't need it. It can't fit in half his field. So now they've kind of backed off the big, and they went 24 fast.
Right.
But not everybody can plant 10 mile an hour.
Exactly.
Some terrain just physically will not allow it.
Exactly.
So how fast can it get? And labor's getting harder to get. So, you got to do more with less, and it gets to be a problem.
Right. I've still said my crystal ball prediction is it's going to go much smaller, but one guy will run multiple tractors at once from the end of the field. They'll find a way to scale that down economically, I think. There could be a thing where you're back to 25, 30-foot field elevators with a tractor with no cab, but one guy driving them from an iPad, still taking 60 feet, but he's just running three of them. I don't know.
It's very possible. If we can bomb stuff with drones from a guy that's 3,000 miles away,
right,
you would think we could probably run a tractor.
Right. Exactly. I was always told it was the first time I ever bought an auto steer. That's been 10 years ago, or maybe closer to 15 now. It was an easy steer back then. And that guy that was installing that was very sharp on that. He said back then, and I don't remember if it was Deere or Trimble or who done it, but their auto steer system back then was set up to where you told that tractor to go over here and work this entire field, and then it would come back and park itself right where it was. But they could never release it because when that tractor went to cross the road, it didn't know if there was a car coming or there was a ditch or what, so it wasn't feasible at the time back then because there was no other intelligence to tell it that, hey, there's a problem or there's a car or whatever,
as we move towards self-driving cars and this, that, and the other, they've got cameras and they've got, I don't know what's the term, LADAR. I think we're lasers and this, that, and the other. I assume all that will play into farming equipment at some point. The problem they're going to have with that is, you see a rock, you stop and you get out and you pick it up.
Right.
You see a tile hole, you note it on your phone, hey, we got to come back over to the back room and fix that up. That thing's not going to know that. It's going to blow on.
Exactly. You get to a mud hole, we've done this in the spring when you've had a wet spring. There's been some water there 3 days ago and you assess it on the fly. Well, I can make it, I can't.
Try to camouflage it for the planter guy, and then you laugh the whole time thinking, wonder if he'll make it through that.
Exactly.
We'll hang the wing out there, work that out for him.
Yeah, or that thing ain't going to do that. I mean, and you can't have stuff that's stopping every time there's a rock the size of a tennis ball.
No.
So I don't know how they'll ever get around that. I mean, I suppose they'll find a way. I mean, we've got technology now that's literally targeting weeds as a sprayer's going through the field, and I'm not sure.
For sure. I'm not sure. All that technology is great when it works, and it sounds awesome, and it'll be fun to see it play out. But by the same token, as this equipment has gotten so big, it allows farming to get to a non-personal level, I guess I'll call it.
Right.
Let's say you can effectively manage with a family of four or whatever, 2,500 acres, whatever your number is.
Right.
And that 2,500 acres like the back of your hand.
Right.
When you start getting big,
right,
some things fall through the cracks, this, that, and the other. And the problem with farm machinery is it's gotten so big that your second user, your third user, your fourth user, they don't need a 790 combine.
Right.
They don't have the grain trucks, or semis, they don't have the auger cart, they don't have the grain bin set up for it. If you drop it off at their place with a 16-row head, they can't even get it in the shed. They don't
exactly.
Even, so the second tier of that gets really tough to deal with. And I think the market's starting to realize a little bit of that.
Right.
If you'll notice in the tillage world, everything's starting to fold different now.
Yep.
Because it's got so wide, can't get it down the road.
Exactly.
So we're folding it different, and then we can get it in the shed better, and this, that, and the other.
Yep.
I think some of that's going to play into that factor. The machinery companies, truthfully, have probably not done themselves a favor. Let's say combines never got bigger than 9600s and 2388s. Okay, so 6,000 acre farmer needs 3 of those.
Right.
Let's just say 3. Well, now he's got 1. Well, was the machinery company better off to sell him 3?
Right.
Or sell him 1?
Exactly.
And then the next guy, like I said, there again, he doesn't need a 790. Yep. So what do you do with his used one?
Right.
Right. You drop a 600 horse 4-wheel drive off at a guy that farms 400 acres.
Yeah.
What's he going to pull with it?
Yeah, exactly.
He can't afford a 50-foot fuel cultivator.
Right. Nor does he need one.
Nor does he need one.
Yeah.
He can't turn around. He can't get it through these patches, this, that, and the other. So,
right.
Everything's going bigger, better, badder. But is that right or wrong?
Right.
Time will tell, I guess.
I need to ask my local dealer and see if they would even know, because as most of you know that follow me on TikTok, we actually traded combines this winter for a year-old machine. And he made the comment then that as far as the guys that are rolling combines, and I think the magic number was 4. That combine's got to be rolled out 4 times before it's fully paid for through the dealer. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I wonder what that was back when that was a $150,000 combine. I wonder what that roll was.
I don't know. You think about the local guys around here that maybe they bought a new 1660, brand new off the showroom floor.
Yep.
And then they kept that till they retired.
Right.
And it still only had 3,000 hours on it. They'd spent 10 grand on it, maintaining it. Now you talk to a guy that's got a new combine, he ran it 1 season, he spent $30,000 on it, getting it back up to snuff after he had it CMI'd.
Right.
Your second tier market of that, if you're a smaller guy like you and I, it's like, man, I'm not really looking to spend 30 grand on repairs on this. There was a time where you could rebuild a red combine, 10 grand in parts would pretty much take you from the feeder house to the spreaders.
Right.
Now it's not really that way.
Exactly.
10 grand will get you in the door.
Right. And that's, we catch, or I do on TikTok and other places, a lot of flack because, we farm with a lot of new, nice machinery, which it ain't mine. I've made that very clear. I'm not the one writing the checks on this deal. And that's a whole nother backstory. You'll have to go to TikTok to see how that deal works. But that's always been the theory with Kevin on our farm is, he has always tried to trade combines every 5 years. And people are like, well, why do you need a combine that new? But his theory was, okay, if I buy a 1-year-old combine and I run that thing for 15 years, it's going to cost me so fucking much now when I go to trade it.
Yeah.
That then it's really not feasible. So now it's like, if you can keep rolling these things for, 100, 120 grand to have a year-old combine, it's like, why not? I mean,
my entire winter has been spent, well, not my entire winter, but a lot of time this winter. As you know, I like to talk on the phone in the evenings to catch up with my buddies. I love talking to people. I love friends. So that's what I do in the evenings, whatnot. After the wife and kids go to bed, I call up my friends and we talk farming. And that's been the debate amongst 4 or 5 of my friends that all farm, different amounts. What's the cheapest way for me to own a combine?
Right.
Should I lease it? Should I buy it? Should I trade every year? Should I do this, that, and the other? And what I've determined is they're all expensive now. It doesn't really matter how you do it. They're all expensive. What you need is a DeLorean and a time machine so you can go back and buy 15 9600s or 2388s, park them in the shed, use them until they're wore out, pull another one out, scrap them off, and go on, because things have gotten so expensive now from the maintenance standpoint.
Right.
And the wear, it's very tough to justify it. But like I said, you're either going to pay me now or pay me later.
Right.
You're either going to nickel and dime yourself to the same amount or you're going to put it into a new machine.
To me, we're the type, when we go to the field, I hate having trouble. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be fiddle fucking around that, here's a belt, here's a bearing, here's this, that, and the other. And we always run ours through the shop preseason every year, go through the whole inspection. And we get along good and we don't have much trouble. And by the same token is, with us having very nice, very modern, low-houred stuff, it brings a premium. I mean, we about shit when they told us what they were going to give us for our trade-in. And I mean, it truly was. It's a premium. We almost couldn't afford to not trade for what they were going to give us.
Yeah.
And when you finally run the numbers, and don't quote me on this because I don't have my notepad in front of me, I think it cost us $14.73 to run that last combine that we had an acre.
That's pretty good. You can't rent one for that.
No,
you can't hire your neighbor to do it for that.
Exactly. So I think it's one of them. It's almost like taxes. How farmers play the game of when you're selling crops and buying inputs in different years. And I think whatever system you get on, as long as you can keep that going, try to maintain that.
You can't hardly get in and get out and switch. Once you're in a lane, you better stay in that lane because you can't switch.
Exactly.
And the other thing is, new equipment goes up so often now that it drags used stuff up with it.
Exactly.
I assume there's going to come a time where there's going to be a couple years in there where there's going to be a correction in there probably.
Right.
Now that we're at $1 million combines.
Right.
once, if the 80s, God forbid, happen again, where that stuff kind of corrects,
right,
resets, and goes on. I mean, you see that with farmland or with anything. I mean, it always happens eventually,
right. And to
whether
me,
it's gas or anything,
That next correction may be when it goes, and if my thinking is right, if it goes full automation. So take the old 9600 John Deere combines, 95. I mean, them things were everywhere. I mean, everybody around here that was a John Deere guy had one. I mean,
absolutely,
tons of them. And when they were trading them in for rotary combines, Deere didn't want them. What the hell are they going to do with them?
Yeah.
They're going to ship them to South America. But, I mean, by the time you give this guy what you think it's worth and ship it to South America, they're losing their ass.
They melted a bunch of them.
Yeah, so that may be the next time things really take a setback, when you go to a fully automated combine with no operator, or however you want to word that, to the ones that we're running nowadays. That may be your next reset. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's interesting times for sure. I mean, you never know how all that's going to go.
I don't know. Things have really changed. I mean, do you guys see that in the tractor pulling world? I mean, is there much technology in that?
Yeah, I mean, that has changed leaps and bounds. To kind of tie it into the farming thing, this was before my time, but there's a lot of guys back in the 70s that bought a brand new tractor, never took it to the field, made it into a pulling tractor.
No kidding.
A brand new 1466. They'd order them narrow front, no 3-point, no PTO.
No kidding.
Right up from the factory. They drop it off the dealer and take it straight to the track. But everybody, you think about that, and it's like, wow, I can't fathom that, because tractors are so expensive now.
Right.
But back then, the other thing is, where are you going to buy a used 1066?
Well,
there weren't any.
Yeah.
If you wanted a 1066, you were going to go in and order it.
Right.
They weren't out there to be had. The guys that bought them didn't trade.
Right.
They weren't trading back for a 560.
Right.
So those guys would order them brand new off the showroom floor, take them straight to the shop.
I didn't know that. That is unbelievable.
There were several of them. There was a lot of them. Bob Thompson, the Illinois Streaker, a famous tractor from Lewiston, Illinois. His was brand new off the showroom floor. I think Danny Dean, South Charleston, Ohio, a legend in the sport. I think his come brand new and took it straight to the track. But you can't fathom that now. But by that same token, no new tractors get made into pulling tractors now, because none of it correlates. But there's a lot of technology, and I mean, so. The turbo technology has just changed just astronomically. I mean, we got in the pro stock class in 1998, and we probably had back then, nobody dynoed back then, but we probably had 1,500, 2,000 horsepower, maybe, somewhere in that range. We've gained more than that from then till now. We've gained more than we even had back then.
Wow.
I remember when I was, when we first got in that class or whatever, a couple years in or whatever, a 4.6-inch turbo came out from Hypermax. It's like, holy cow, how are you ever going to turn that?
Right.
Now they've got 5.6s, 5.7, 5.8s, 5.9s, they're 6-inch turbos.
Right.
And they turn easier than those did back then, because the technology has come so far.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Every year you think, well, it'll never get better, more than this. Right. And then the next year something comes out, you're like, well, another 200 horse.
Unreal.
It just keeps stacking on there. Now they're 4,000 or 5,000 horsepower.
Wow.
And it's a little bit mind-boggling.
I know I get to see it, like when you post videos on TikTok, or even we've been out, at somebody's shed, and you'll throw in a pulling video from years ago, and it's funny because it's kind of our version of the farm machinery.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was funny how back then, that pulling, your old 1466 farm, that was badass. I mean, that was the coolest thing on the planet. You look at it now, it's like, Jesus Christ, that thing's going like, 8 miles an hour, or whatever it is. I mean, it's nothing.
You didn't have, it was as good as it got then.
Yeah.
But it was probably, I don't know, 800 horse maybe.
Right.
It was probably 800 by the end, or 900.
How much did your speed change? So they have a pro stock pulling tractor called Nasty Stuff for any of you guys in the pulling world. So going all the way back to when you guys first started pro stock pulling, what was your miles per hour down the track then compared to now? Has that changed much? Or
the funny thing about that is the sled technology changed in there. So sleds used to run uphill, and they were a constant drag. And then they kind of changed to where they run downhill and they have airbags and then push downs on the pan. So when that change happened, it used to be, it was just a constant drag the whole way.
Right.
And that really changed how you could set the tractor up, because back then you were churning and burning the whole time.
Right. So now you're getting a little bit of a head start. Would that be fair to say?
They start easier.
Yeah. So you're taking off.
Back then it was kind of like a dead weight.
Yeah.
And then it just got worse.
Gotcha.
So as that technology changed in the sled, you could start clicking up the gears and going faster. Now, that being said, once everything went downhill on the sled side of things, downhill sleds, and the speed went up, speed really doesn't change.
Really?
I don't go any faster now than I did 5 years ago.
No kidding.
32 mile an hour on a normal length track is about all the sled can get you up to and get you back down.
I was going to say,
we've gained 1,000 horsepower in there, but you don't go any faster because you can't get it to the ground.
And a standard track is between 300 and 400 feet. I mean, that probably varies.
Yeah, it depends on the year and the organization and know who's feeling what that day.
So nonetheless, you're not going to get up to 60 mile an hour and back, in 400.
No.
I mean,
no, they can't get you up to that and back down.
Right.
For the longest time, one of our fastest passes was in our lowest gear on the shortest track at Louisville at the National Farm Machinery Show.
Is that right?
Yeah, that was one of our fastest peak speeds. I mean, we didn't maintain it very long, but that was my fastest peak speed for a couple of years.
So speaking of Louisville, I know there's probably a lot of people listening that go to that or attend to pull down there or have at least been to it. So how long is the track at Louisville compared to Joe Blow County? I mean, is Louisville like considerably shorter?
Louisville's like 245 foot, roughly.
Oh, shit. So, I mean, that's pretty short.
It's pretty short. Yeah, so it's on you pretty quick.
So you're going to set the tractor up completely different on that gig, I'm assuming?
Not near as much as we used to. We ran different tires for down there, and then they changed the rule on that. So you lost a gear for that, and you lost a gear for the short track. Things are a little different. Now, it's pretty much just your good outdoors track setup, which doesn't make sense, but pretty much a good track outdoors, you set it up basically the same, maybe a little more nose weight because it gets on you pretty quick, and you're good.
I'll be dang. So is tractor pulling... can that be as particular as NASCAR? I mean, they talk in NASCAR, it's talking air temperature, humidity. I mean, which I know that's tires on pavement, but I mean, does outside temperature affect the way that tractor runs, or is that close enough that you never really see?
So in the Pro Stock class, we run intercoolers, so we burn 80 pounds of ice in a pass. Mm-hmm. So we've taken a little bit of that out. Cooler nights, they definitely run better than they do, hot summer day, but doesn't affect us as much. But you get in the spark plug classes. I mean, those guys got handheld computers.
Really?
They're monitoring the air. Like Louisville's a real problem for those guys because the starting line is by that big overhead door.
Yep.
So depending on the temperature, they may have that door open or they may open and close it the whole time.
Right.
So the air is good at the starting line, but it's bad at the finish line.
Okay.
That's why you see a lot of tractors at Louisville that'll come off the line. They're rocking it and they're good to go. And then at the end, bang, they pop and die because the air changed and they can't set it up for both. Jeez. So you got to pick one or the other, and you don't know when they're going to open the door, right?
Right.
So it really messes with the spark plug guys. In the Pro Stock world, the intercooler stuff, it doesn't affect us a lot. But yeah, if it's a super hot, humid night, like, it's been several years ago now, but Salem, Illinois, I'll never forget it. It was probably the hottest place I've ever been in my life. It rained like 1/10 of an inch right before the pull. It was so humid you could cut the air with a knife. I mean, you could physically see the air.
Yep.
It was that hot or whatnot. They just don't run good in that. The air is crap.
Sure.
I had a very good night that night, but the air is bad.
Right.
But it affects everybody the same. But the intercoolers have helped with that a lot.
Right. And I assume that's like anything else nowadays. You can plug a computer in and tell everything about that motor you probably want to know.
So most everybody in the bigger classes anyway has full data acquisition. So it's going to give you all your exhaust temps, all your pressures, your speed, your RPMs, your wheel speed, on down the line. So you can monitor. You can't control anything with electronics and tractor pulling.
Right. You can see what happened after you're done.
But you can see what happens after you're done and tune accordingly. Like I've got it's not an iPad, but it's a Droid tablet of some fashion on my dash, live display. It shows me all my peaks when I'm done, and then I download it to the laptop and see the whole run when it's over. So you can kind of stack this was your pass yesterday, this is your pass today. The changes you made, okay, it made it, we raised my exhaust temp 200 degrees, I've got 5 more pounds of boost, whatever you got.
I'll be darned. Now, are tire pressures as picky on tractor pulling as like NASCAR? They'll make 20 laps and come in and change tire pressures, where as tractor pulling, is that something you're pretty much going to run?
You're going to adjust tire pressure, the heat of the day. If you let it sit outside and the sun's blaring on it and then, it gets dark, they'll change quite a bit there, but as far as your tire pressure going down the track, it's not like you're not heating them up like NASCAR.
Yeah, exactly.
So you set it on the starting line, a couple tractors before you run, and then you're good.
Exactly.
It doesn't really matter.
I don't know, what's probably the most catastrophic failure you've ever had? Have you ever completely scattered a motor across the track?
We've thrown a rod a couple of times. Back in the day when we were on stock cranks and whatnot, you start spinning over 5,500, 6,000 RPMs. Those stock cranks didn't like that very well.
Wow.
So Louisville, 2 or 3 years in a row there, you can plan on you're going to put a crank in when you get home.
Is that right?
Yeah. If you didn't, you'll find out a couple pulls later that you should have.
No kidding.
Found that out the hard way a couple of times. It'll bend. Well, You can see that if you put a piece of steel in a lathe that's not balanced, it'll bend itself. The cranks do the same thing. About 6,500, they just bow.
I'll be dang. So on a pulling tractor like that, and don't take I'm not asking for any of your personal, because I know people like to not discuss what they're actually doing on their own tractor. But so in a tractor like yours, is that an IH block? I mean, is that a motor out of a 1460s or something, or what?
Well, it's based on that. It used to be, and then I don't know what it's been now. Probably 6, 7, 8 years ago now, we put an aftermarket block in.
Really?
But prior to that, it was the same block like would be in a 5288, a school bus, a 1066. Yeah, it was old
I had no clue what they used on that. I assumed that's probably what it was, but I didn't have any idea.
At some point in time, we kind of outgrew those, and they changed the rule and allowed. And then I think those blocks are getting to be 30, 40 years old too.
Yeah.
So they changed the rule on that. Now you can make your own block. It has to be based on that, so the crank's in the same spot, the cam's in the same spot.
Right.
But you can make it out of better steel.
Right.
You can make it a little thicker.
Right. Yeah, because there's got to be thousands of them trashed every year just in pulling tractors, and like you say, they're getting. Eventually you're going to run out of them if you don't do something.
Thank God, a lot of Navistar trucks rusted out. So and every school bus had a DT466 in it, so you could yank them out of that. But now all that, there was a period of time, I don't know what it's been, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago now, where a bunch of that stuff got shipped to Africa.
Really?
They were clipping all that out of those buses, this, that, and the other, and they were taking it all over there. I don't know what they were using it for, but that's what a guy told me that run a salvage yard. He's like, man, as fast as I can get them, I'm shipping them over there. In any form. They don't care if they run. They don't. They'll take them all. Wow. I don't know if it was true, but I don't know why he lied to me about
it. Yeah, exactly.
So a bunch of that stuff got cleaned up that way, and they're getting old now. The last version that we want was like 92, 93.
Right.
Well, that was a long time ago now. I don't like to think that it is, but it is.
Right. Yeah, it is. I'll be darned. So I assume, your boy now, he's what, 7, 8?
9 now.
9. Okay. So has he pulled yet or not? Because you were probably what, 10, 11, 12?
I was probably...
We were fairly young when you were pulling in the local pools.
13 or 14.
Was it? And that wasn't, for those of you listening, that wasn't on a pro stock at that age. He had, I know you pulled an 806 that 1 year.
806, and then we got the 1468.
Yep.
And then I ran the 1466 farm stock after that.
Yeah, yep. So I assumed as Max, your boy, does he take interest in it? Something he's probably
I think so. Yeah, some.
Yeah.
It's hard to gauge that at that age.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot will change between now.
But I think he's interested in it somewhat.
Yeah. I don't know, what's been your favorite tractor you've ever, like if you could, is the pro stock you got now, is that by far your favorite? Was it the old farm stock? Was it just the old screwing around? What do you think was the...
The farm stock was a pretty good time. At the time, it's like, well, you go to the same polls every year. You run against the same 15 guys every night. We kind of wanted to expand our horizons, go new places, this, that, and the other. Now, looking back, you're like, man, what good times.
Right.
Some of the guys I used to pull with, Tim and Scott Brower, Gene and Alan Stump, all those guys or whatever. Super good people, the Bramer brothers, whatever. All those guys, super great guys. We were a close-knit family. It was a great time. And now, of course, everything gets better with time, right? So you look back and you're like, man, I look back to that farm stock tractor. I'm like, man, it was fun. All we did was load it on the trailer,
right?
Fill it up with fuel once a year,
right?
Fuel tank, so we just filled it up at the beginning. We filled it up at the
exactly.
end. Changed the oil once in the middle. We just pulled,
right? And that stuff back then, of course, you didn't have the technology, but it wasn't near as picky. Was you got on it, turned the key, and pretty much
turned the key, and you went. It wasn't like now where something comes out every week.
Exactly.
Back then, if you had current stuff, you might go 2-3 years not have to buy anything.
Right.
A little something here or there, but nothing major. Maybe a turbo or something.
Exactly.
Now it's week to week. Stuff changes.
Right.
The suppliers are getting pushed to come out with new stuff all the time. There's bigger money in it.
Was it more competitive back then? As far as what I mean is when you showed up, anybody could win that. And I know it's still that way a little bit today, but is it like NASCAR? It's like, okay, you got 40 people out here, but, I can tell you probably one of the top 7 or 8 that's going to win this. Has that changed from the aspect back then? It was like, it was just fair game, anybody can win this, or is it?
I think in your bigger classes, it's probably a little more the NASCAR way now. Back in the day, there was 40 guys that had the A-list package, let's say,
right.
or some of the A-list stuff. Well, now... And you could get by with a lot of ingenuity, right? So I didn't have to have the A-list stuff. I could be creative because 90% of the parts were stock, right?
Right.
So I got a buddy that machined me this gear, and my gear is 1 tooth faster than his.
Right.
He doesn't know it because nobody else is selling them.
Right.
So I can get him off this.
There you go.
Now the hard parts cost what the hard parts cost, and the internet, and they're all available everywhere. And everybody knows kind of what they got, and it's full on packaged. So
to me, that would have been cool back then, where you can kind of, engineer it on your own and find different ways to beat this guy. Where you're not cheating. I mean, it's obvious that you're just being.
It's perfectly legal, but you're just being.
You're ahead of the game.
Creative. Like those old tractors. Okay, so they take an intercooler off of a TD8 or TD15 bulldozer and put them on a 1066. I still got one sitting in the shop. You want to see it? And you look at it today, you're like, huh. That makes some good salvage, but it's not really good for anything else. But they did stuff like that. A lot of creative stuff. Just with your hands.
Exactly.
We're gonna get a piece of metal and we're gonna beat it into the shape we need it to be. And this, that. Now CNCs and this, that, and the other. It's like I'm not beating anything. I'm gonna push the button on that machine. I'm gonna chunk out 30 of them. I'm gonna sell them to everybody I know.
And I assume the rules back then was a little. I don't know if looser is the right word. I'm assuming nowadays. Everything on that tractor is probably regulated to where you're not going to get over on the other guy too much.
Yes and no. It's regulated, but it's not necessarily checked that well.
Really?
So, there's not, they have NASCAR money for 40 tech guys.
Right.
At every event. I mean, they're not holding templates over a tractor and measuring this. Occasionally they'll measure some of this, that, and the other. But generally speaking, it's a gentleman's sport.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about that quite as much. And the other thing is the prize money isn't huge. So you don't have quite the deal like now NASCAR. There's $150,000 on the line. So by gosh, if I can run this and they're not going to catch it, I'm going to run it.
Exactly.
Tractor pulling, it's bragging rights, and it's just a good excuse to hang out with your friends.
Right.
So
that's what I think would have been cool back in the farm stock days. You take a guy like your dad, who's a very well respected mechanic, really knows what he's doing, and he just has to outthink the other guy. What can I do to get ahead of this guy? And you
take 3 turbos, make them into one.
Yeah. Right.
Well, now they're not doing that. They're CNCing the whole turbo from scratch, and nothing comes off a production line. They're all making it there.
Exactly. And that's what I even hate about the local polls anymore, and that's why I almost quit going to them, because it got to where it was just such a money game. Because these local towns with 400 people, I mean, once again, they've got rules printed on a piece of paper, but how far can you? I mean, nobody's got the money to tear this tractor down to see what's inside it. And it got to where the guy with the most money was winning, but you couldn't do nothing about it, because how you going to prove it,
Exactly. Unfortunately, I think every motorsport's to that point now.
Right.
Whether it's NASCAR, NHRA, tractor pulling, it's gotten to the point where there's always going to be somebody that's willing to write a bigger check.
Right.
And that makes a lot. And it's always been that way a little bit.
Right.
But you could kind of outmaneuver some of those guys. Now, you can once in a while, but to do it consistently is very difficult.
Right. And that's what always killed me about these guys at these local polls that were, take the old barnyard class that I used to pull in, 7130 Case IH front wheel assist Magnum. You had to run a 2-wheel drive. I mean, they were literally farm tractors.
Yeah.
And nobody cared. But once again, you had these guys, everybody would turn the screw prior to the pull because, big deal. Okay, fine. We turned it up a little bit. We're going to turn it right back down because we got to use this tractor. I'm not looking to scatter the fucking motor everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you had the guys that, they had to put a bigger turbo on, then a different cam. And it's like, God damn it, a 60-30 coming down the track that you're farming with is not blowing a fucking tornado 50 feet in the air all the way down the track, And it just ruined it. It's like, would you guys just stop and just let somebody have fun in a class for once?
It's tough to regulate that. I mean, human nature takes you to the point where you want to do more than the other guy, but at some point in time, and what tractor pulling fails to realize, I'll get on my soapbox here, is we're selling a show.
Right, exactly.
And that show can be good with 1,000 horsepower, it can be good with 3,000 horsepower, it can be good with 5,000 horsepower.
Exactly.
Because they all go the same speed.
Yep.
From the farm stock, hot farm tractors now to pro stock, mods, whatever, they all run the same speed.
Exactly.
They'll maintain it a little longer than the smaller classes, but they all run the same speed.
Right.
So the average fan can't necessarily tell some classes from others, right?
Right.
So you just got to make peace with the fact you're selling a show.
Exactly.
Keep it to a level where you can have 40 participants instead of 10.
Right.
And make it go.
Because it's no different than the sled operator at the beginning of the class, because, they've always got to weight the sled. And, a lot of times you'll see tractors pull twice because something was weighted wrong or whatever. He could stop every one of you guys 100 foot if he wanted, but Absolutely. You're not going to put on a show. So it's like, you got to let him run out the length of the track, and then we're going to find a happy medium here where it's fair for everybody. And so you're right. You're selling a show, and I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you ever line some of this stuff out at the local level tractor pulls where it's like, guys, come on. I just want to bring my 10-year-old boy up here and let him pull my old 40-20 to have fun, but you had to fucking ruin it because you put twin turbos and everything else on yours to win $75. I mean, come on.
Well, they used to give you a bag of seed corn, but seed corn got too high, so they wouldn't give you that now.
Exactly. Yeah, now I wish they would. Go back and give them the seed corn. I'll take $300.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, they cut that out.
Yeah, it's just funny though how things have changed. And I'll tell you another one that I always have to go back and look at is the volume of tractors made back in the day.
Yeah.
And don't quote me on the numbers, but I'm wanting to say like between a John Deere A and like a Farmall M or an H. I mean, there was like what 700,000 of each one of those. I mean, it was a mind-boggling number.
Could be
of M's and H's that were produced.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just crazy stupid.
But like I said, back then, there was no used tractors. I mean, you got off a horse and got on an M.
Exactly. Exactly.
And they were probably what, $800?
Right, yeah. Wouldn't have been any more than that, I don't think.
So you went and got one as soon as you scraped up, $400 to put down.
Yep.
And went and got one.
Yep. Yeah, and I don't quote me on them numbers because I don't remember, but it was on Tractor Data. And pulled it up one day, and I mean, it was an absolutely mind-boggling number. I mean, it was well over 200,000. I'm not saying it was 6, but I mean, it was a shit pot full of them tractors that were made.
You don't even have to go that far back. Look at the numbers of tractors they made in the 70s of whatever model.
Right.
I think they made 40-some thousand 1066s.
Yep.
Then go to the 80s.
Right.
And pick out any model in the 80s.
Yeah.
And it's not nowhere near 40,000.
Well, when did IH hit the 5 millionth the 1066? I mean, that was the 5 millionth company tractor, not the 5 millionth 1066 for those of you listening. But was that in like 75, 74?
Yeah, it'd have been right in there.
Sometime, they'd made 5 million tractors since the beginning of the company. And I mean, what have they made since then? I mean, 400,000? I mean, it wouldn't be nothing.
Yeah, it's probably not astronomical. And the funny thing about that is, look how long it took any other company to get to the 5 million mark. It was years before anybody else got to 5 million.
Yeah, I mean, what would Deere be roughly? I have no idea when Deere's 5 million tractor.
I think it took them another 10, 15 years.
Did it?
I think.
Because did Deere make a big deal about it when they?
Not that I know of.
Really? And I guess on IH, why was it the 5 millionth? Was it just, or did they do that every time they hit a million? I mean, was there the 1 millionth?
No, I think it just seemed like a good thing to do at the time. A lot of that depends on who's in charge of what at a given time.
Right.
And somebody in marketing probably said, "Hey, we're coming up on 5 million.
Yep.
Let's paint it white. And let's showcase it."
Which maybe it was closer to 76 because everybody got patriotic with the bicentennial. Case had the 1570 Spirit of 76, so maybe Internationals was getting close. Not saying it was in 76, obviously, because it wasn't a black stripe, but maybe it was getting close.
It was getting close, yeah.
Kind of way to kick that off or whatever. But I don't think Deere done anything, did they? To my knowledge.
Not that I know of.
Right.
The other thing I always question on those is I don't know if those companies know when they made what. Did they keep that close account? Was there a guy sitting there with a clicker watching that? I'm not sure that some of those didn't slip through the cracks. That could have been the 6 millionth tractor, could have been the 4 millionth.
Exactly.
I mean, who's going to prove them wrong?
Right. I mean, do they count the ones that they know are going for testing? You're going to pull this tractor off the line, take it to the track, and just beat the shit out of it.
It's pretty subjective.
Right.
I'm not sure they actually know.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's pretty crazy. I would like to know how many tractors IH, and throw in the Case H, whatever, have been built since the 5 millionth up until now. I mean, it wouldn't be any.
They're not to 10 million, I bet. And it's been several years since then.
Exactly.
Like I said, everything gets bigger.
Yeah, it took you back then 2 or 3 M's and H's to do what a 1466 would do just in the 70s. I mean, so.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's neat how that stuff has changed. And I've always said there's nothing on the face of this earth, in my opinion, and maybe it's just because I'm in it, that has changed as rapidly as farming has. I mean, even you and I went from 806s that were built in the 60s, and that's what everybody farmed with when we were kids. I mean, you didn't have nothing new. I mean, you have the occasional guy that he might have bought a 1086 or something, and then it seemed like there was a big jump in there. Guys went from 1066s all the way up to fairly recent Magnum, a 7230 or something.
Well, you remember the one guy in the neighborhood had a Magnum. You're like, holy cow!
Right,
that guy bought a Magnum.
Yeah, exactly.
We're just coming off the 80s,
right?
Or it was in the late 80s. Yeah. It's like, did he rob a bank? Where'd he come up with this Magnum? It's like, and that didn't really progress. And it's like bang, 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 bang. Everybody's got something newer because it started progressing so fast.
Yep.
When we were kids, nobody had a front wheel assist tractor.
Right.
It wasn't really until the Magnums or, and probably a 4960 Deere.
Yep. That's
8000 series where you start seeing front wheel assist show up.
Yep.
There just wasn't very many. We were a Heston dealer back then and sold a fair amount of front wheel assist, but that was a little bit unheard of.
Yeah.
I love 50 series internationals, but a front wheel assist one of those takes 40 acres to turn.
Yeah, exactly. And in our immediate area around here, the only 4-wheel drive tractors you've seen were Steigers. I don't know of anybody that had a red 4-wheel drive or a 4-wheel drive John Deere. And I mean, there might be one that fell through the cracks, but there was several green Steigers.
Very few. There was a few green Steigers, maybe 1 or 2 versatiles, but they'd have been fairly far away.
Yep.
I can't think of any right in our neighborhood, but yeah, some green staggers or whatever. It's always funny to me how some of the companies that have arguably the best product have poor business management and don't end up making it.
Yeah, it is.
You know, when it comes to four-wheel drives, Stagger more or less invented them, and they're the best at it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But they didn't survive.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
I mean, they're still kind of alive today. And I'd be honest with you, if I was ordering a new one today, and I'm a red guy through and through, you know that, I'll take one in lime green.
Yep, exactly.
I want mine
Those
lime
look
green.
cool.
I still love them in lime green.
And it's crazy, even up until, I'm going to say, let's just call it 10 years ago, when you parked a Case IH Steiger four-wheel drive tractor next to a deer, the amount of steel in that Steiger tractor set next to that deer was mind-boggling. I mean, everything on that deer was plastic. The fenders, the hood, everything. I mean, everything on that IH was steel.
Yeah.
I mean, other than the hood that you raised to work on the motor. But I mean, the fenders, the fuel tanks, all that.
Well, up until the 9300 series, even the hood was steel, you know.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, on those. You know, the nice part about Stagger always was and maybe this is part of their demise, but you know, you could about go to a Napa and rebuild a Stagger.
Right.
You know, the brake master cylinders, this, that, and the other.
Yep.
All that stuff was whatever they could go and get and source because they weren't a large company. I mean, they were a large company compared to, you know, companies that you and I might run.
Sure.
But they weren't, in the grand scheme of Case and Deere,
right,
they weren't a large company. So you could go get some of that stuff or whatever, and they try to use all common parts and so on and so forth, which probably actually plays against them in the long run.
Right.
Because, well, then why am I going back to the dealer to get it?
Right.
I'll just go to Napa.
Exactly.
That's where they're going to get it anyway.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, those things are pretty massive. You know, you think back, it's like those things were 500 and some horse with 1,150 cubic inch motors when they were green. And then we went through a period where four-wheel drives were only 400 and some horse.
Yep.
And it took us how much longer to get back to 525, 600 again?
Yeah.
You know, and doing it with smaller engines, pushing them harder.
Right.
But it's like, if you see one of those old 525s with that KT 1150 in it, they're still pretty cool, and those things bring killer money.
Is that right?
Because there wasn't a ton of them, and they're still pretty awesome.
Right.
You
What all was there? There was a puma, a tiger, a panther. I mean, there was
you
a
got to
bunch.
know your cats to be a Steiger guy.
Exactly.
You got to know your cats. And I'm not a cat expert when it comes to cats, but I have learned them over the years. And all I can tell you is I think a tiger is the biggest one.
Was it?
A tiger's the biggest cat. Yeah.
Yep. I think the ones that I ran years ago, it was an ST310. I think them was a panther, if I remember.
Those were Panthers. We had an ST310.
Okay.
Great tractor. Loved it.
Yep.
It was a Panther.
And now could you
Panther
get
3.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now could you get either the cat motor or the Cummins, or was it the cat was in the smaller?
No, and that's probably another thing where Steiger may or may not have been wise at. I mean, they were trying to appease everybody, it looked like to me, but you could basically get a cat version or a Cummins version in every size tractor they made.
Really? I didn't know.
For the most part, yeah.
I'll be dang.
They were a little different model number.
Yep.
Like, you know, the 310 was a Cummins, but you could get a version of a cat that might have been a 325 or whatever.
I'll be dang.
Yeah, so then they did that clear. Even some of the first 9100 series Steigers had cats.
I'll be dang.
You could get a cat in a few of those.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
I tell you, I set my personal record on a Steiger ST310 back when I was working for Hennings. We'd rented some, and this was with a 38-foot John Deere 726 mulch finisher, which that's a whole other story on them if you're into tillage.
Yeah.
But I worked, and you got to realize for central Illinois where we're at, now, you know, we're not up around Decatur or northern Illinois where you got huge fields. I mean, around here, the biggest field you're going to find is about 80 acres.
Yeah.
You might find a 120 every now and again. And,
Yeah.
and you don't have all 80s. I mean, it's a nice one's an 80, then you got 40s and on down. But I worked 525 acres in one day with that son of a bitch with a 38-foot mulch
That's pretty
finisher.
good. That's pretty good, guys.
And that was, I started at probably 6:30 that morning, and it was, I'm going to say 9:30 that night. I finally called Rob. And I'm like, you got to have somebody come relieve. I'm like, I can't do it. Because it was all, you know, chiseled corn stalks. And I mean, just fucking beat me to death the entire day. And he's like, I think you've had enough for one day.
I'll never forget, we had that ST310, which was a great tractor. I loved it dearly. If I'd have had the money, I'd have kept it and I'd have parked it in the shed. But it was too big to store just for fun. But I love that tractor. Well, we just kind of got into the vertical tillage thing where we were running fast. And that thing had lights in the front of it. There might have been 2 Bic lighters and maybe a mag light with a dead battery.
Yep.
I mean, the lights were not good. So you're running 10, 12 mile an hour. Of course, that thing has a 20 speed. So you've got a gear for everything.
Exactly.
Like literally, I mean, that was the one beauty of the Steiger. You had a gear from if you wanted to walk next to it and shine the tires.
Yep.
Or you want to go 26 mile an hour down the road. It had a gear in there for everything. So I'm clipping along, and I'm in a field with woods on both sides, and I'm running at an angle. Next thing you know, and you can't idle it up too much on the ends because you don't have a hydraulics to steer it and raise the implement. It's like, holy shit, there's some trees.
You're outrunning the headlights.
I got to turn, I'm outrunning the headlights, and the brakes ain't real good, so you better turn fast. Yeah, you get yourself in a little bit of a bind with one of those. So that wasn't too long after that. Back then, HID'd everything, put all HID lights all the way around it, and that made all the difference in the world. But.
And truthfully, I don't know where they ever come up with the lime green color, but it sounds dumb as shit, but that was cool.
The reason they did that is they got a bulk buy on a bunch of leftover paint in that color.
Is that right?
They got a sweet deal on some paint originally in that color, and they're like, well, now it's our color, so we got to go with it.
I'll be damned.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I say, I can name of 3 or 4 around here in the immediate area back when I was a kid, and you didn't really pay that much attention to them. You're like, hey, you always knew it was a Steiger. I mean, that name, and the color. But looking back now, that was cool. I mean, because you don't see them things anywhere anymore.
Not very many. There was a guy not very far from here who used to rent 30 or 40 of them out a year.
Yep, exactly.
Your former employer had a couple of them from him for a little bit.
Yep.
And that's all kind of went by the wayside because they've gotten old. Now they're more collectible, this, that, and the other. But they pretty much set the standard when it comes to 4-wheel drives.
Yeah, those were. I wonder what does Steiger cost new in the 80s as an ST310? I mean, was that a?
I don't know. We'd have to look at them on tractor data. I don't know.
And also, was that a competitor of Big Bud? Because I know Steiger was in Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Steiger was in Fargo.
Okay. Fargo. And of course, Big Bud was in South Dakota, I think, or somewhere out in there.
Somewhere out in there, but I don't know any Big Buds that made it west or east of the Mississippi.
No, I did not.
Knowledge. So
growing up as a kid collecting toy tractors, I would always see these big white Big Bud tractor toy collectibles, and I'm like, well, that's some knockoff Rural King piece of shit. Until I went on Wheat Harvest in 1998 and was literally out in Big Bud country. It's like, holy shit, these things really are a tractor. I had no idea.
Other than toy shows or tractor shows, I've never seen. I've seen some at a tractor show in person. I've never seen one in the field. I don't know if there's any east of the Mississippi for 20 years in there.
If you would bring a Big Bud back here and try to sell it, well, nowadays I guess with media where everybody knows, but 20 years ago you wouldn't have been able to give it away. It'd been brand new off the factory. Floor with 0 hours, and like, what the hell's that thing? I mean, nobody's heard of it. So I did not know until 1998 that a Big Bud was a real tractor. I'd always seen the toys, and I thought, it's some knockoff, like an Ertl,
Yeah, exactly. No doubt.
No, it was a real tractor. So that's crazy. But I always wonder if that was a response. Big Bud was I assume it was a family-owned company.
I think so. Yeah, I don't know the exact history on them, but
which they're hell for stout too.
I think they had good product, and they were huge, but you couldn't get them down the roads here.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the Steiger thing was, they pretty much set the standard in that for a long, long time.
Yeah, they did. I wonder how IH ever got.
So IH was part owner in Steiger.
The whole time?
Not the whole time. I'm not sure when they bought in, but they were part owner in Steiger for a while. And then I think they might have sold their part off. And then Case bought it back and bought the whole thing then.
Oh, we did.
Yeah. Well, Case didn't buy shit. Tenneco bought something.
Well,
Tenneco didn't buy, or Case didn't buy anything.
Right.
Case went broke long before IH. A little fact that you Case guys ought to realize. But nobody bought a Case because they were good. They bought them because they were cheap.
Yeah. And it's funny, too, because I can barely remember when I was a kid, the Case dealer that sold the white Case tractors at Effingham, Illinois. Now it's a mobile home place now.
Yeah.
But shit, I couldn't have been 7, 8, 9 years old. I barely remember that. And I remember there was international dealerships. I do remember all them around.
Yeah.
And then I remember when it all merged. But I guess maybe that was our cool time. Like we always talk about our dads. We've seen a few big major mergers and Case IH come out of it, and now we've seen I feel we're fortunate is we got to run the old stuff plus the new stuff, where our dads could give 2 shits less about a combine with a yield monitor. That just gets in the way. They just soon rip it out.
I got to push these buttons. Exactly. It's going to harvest crap without it. They don't care.
Exactly. Yeah, that wouldn't be a deal breaker for them. Like, to me, if it ain't got auto steer, fuck it, I don't want it. I'm not even driving it. I refuse to touch the steering wheel. Where my dad or whoever else, that's unheard of to them.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe you can answer this, because I guess I don't really know enough about Versatile Tractors. Was that an independent company of its?
Yeah, I believe so. And they were very popular back in the day as well. My opinion of Versatile versus Steiger, which is my only 2 frames of reference for the most part, Versatile stuff was all fairly unique. Like they made all their own stuff for the most part. That you weren't going to Napa to rebuild one of those.
Gotcha. Now, was them a Cummins motor in a Versa?
Yeah, all the ones I've been around were always Cummins powered. Which is fine. They were kind of the standard to some level.
Right.
They drive completely different than a Stagger. Like
really?
You're not hopping out of a Stagger and hopping in a Versatile and going to feel comfortable.
No kidding. I've never been in one of the old yellow or orange, whatever color, orange and black ones.
If you grew up in one of those, they're probably fine. But if you grew up in Staggers and you hop in one of those, they drive backwards. And I can't explain how they drive backwards, but they drive backwards.
No kidding.
So, myself, we had a 2+2 at one point in time. Yep. I had a 4568, had a 4586, a couple of 4586s.
Yep.
Whatever. They drive backwards.
Really?
To a Stagger. Like you set low, they pivot funny, kind of, sort of. Perfectly good tractors, well within their own. They don't have road gear that will get you anywhere.
Right.
But, they're very successful, very popular, so on and so forth. But everything was unique on them. Like they didn't use a lot of common parts for the most part.
Really? And they sold to Ford New Holland, I guess is how that worked, or was that a merger?
I assume at some level New Holland bought them out. But I really don't know on that.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Because, I know for several years there was a blue tractor that said Ford, and then it had
Versatile and Versatile on them.
But
New Holland can never pick a color. I mean,
right.
It doesn't matter what machinery they use red, they use blue, they use yellow.
Exactly.
They got a rainbow.
And you can actually get a versatile combine now, right?
Now I think you can, yeah.
Yeah, that's one tractor I've never drove, and I've never drove a 2+2 International. I always thought that would be awkward as shit. Pivot in front of the cab.
So 2+2s go one of two ways: you either love them or you hate them.
Right. And for the record, everybody I know that's ever had one absolutely loved it. I've never heard personally anybody that said that was the biggest.
I really can't say anything bad about ours. The only thing I wish it was been a 65 instead of a 35. Okay. 65 shifted on the right where a tractor should shift.
Right.
Or 35 was like a 1086 shift on the left, crawl over the levers, catch them coming out the door, fall and trip. But 2+2s, honestly, would be super popular now to this day had the merger not happened. Case hated those things with a passion, which is why they killed the 70 series off, which would have went over big.
Case one of the old crab steer.
They went to crab steer, which is why when they had Stagger, in the 9200 series, they brought two crab steer models back because they were hell-bent that was going to be the ticket. Right. And they sold like 5 of them because, nobody wants crab steer. You just bend it in the middle.
Exactly.
2+2s, honestly, for a lot of things, were awesome. They're kind of, back then, a front wheel assist took 40 acres to turn around.
Right.
A 2+2 will turn shorter than a 2-wheel drive.
Is that right?
Yeah, they turn short. You don't have to hit the brake at the end. You just crank the wheel, bang, off it goes the other way. Yeah, the hood's long, who cares?
Right.
By today's standards, looking at the hood of a big front wheel assist now with the cooling package and everything you got, your view's not really any different.
Right.
You could carry saddle tanks on those. They turn short for planting, cultivating, a lot of things. They were way ahead of their time. They didn't execute it necessarily as good as they could have.
Right.
But,
and was that a deal on a 2+2? You couldn't put duals on the front, on the smaller ones? I know them bigger, like the 67s or 7388s, whatever the fuck they was.
So 3000s, 33s, 35s, 37s, you weren't supposed to, even though some people did. And they look awesome with duals. But 63s, 65s, 67s, you weren't supposed to either. The 7000 series, you were going to be able to.
Those were badass. There was very few of them ever made, wasn't there?
Like 16 of one and 11 of the other.
Yeah.
And Case really pooped the bed on that deal, in my opinion, by killing those off. For one, they had all the stuff sitting there to build. I heard the stats one time. Like, they had enough parts there sitting there to build like 200, 300, 400 of those already sitting there.
No kidding.
And they salvaged all that stuff. They just sent it to the scrapyard.
Wow.
The few that were together, they went ahead and sold, but they scrapped the rest of them. And truthfully, that would have set the standard to a certain level. Yep. Like I said, you either love them or you hate them. They kind of got a bad rap because the 3000 series, had IH not went broke, they were going to go back and fix a lot of things that they messed up on the 3000 series. Sure. Or 30 series, however you want to call it. But obviously it never happened because the 80s were happening and they went broke. But
wow. So what all is under the hood on a 2+2? I mean, what makes that thing so long? I mean, that thing.
Well, it's the best hood IH ever had. You just pull one clip or pull the cable, and the hood's completely out of your way.
And now, does it slide forward?
It slides forward. Yeah, it slides forward.
So it's like on a track.
It's on a track, rolls forward. If you pick it up at the end and jog it a little bit, you can set it clear off.
No kidding.
Like 3 minutes. Well, not even 3 minutes, like 30 seconds.
I'll be darned.
So it's just the engine and then a drive shaft and the fuel tank.
No kidding. Right. I always wonder, it's like, what in the hell is going on from the front of the cab to the front of the... I mean, it's like, that thing is a mile long, but...
Well, part of it was, though, I think they just wanted to make room for saddle tanks, because back then everybody was spraying their own. You know, you had some sort of attachment on your fuel cultivator where you were spraying dual or whatever it was back then. Atrazine, whatever. You were spraying it, and you needed saddle tanks, right? Well, your 4840 ain't carrying them. Your 1086 ain't carrying them very well. 2+2 will.
I'll be done.
And they turn short. They're not in the way. You can make it happen. You know, so...
I always wanted to drive one because it just looked weird as hell, pivot in front of the cab instead of behind the cab. To me, that would be so awkward, but I guess it's not.
It's fine. You just followed it around.
I'll be damned.
You know, it's not... wherever the nose goes, you're going.
Right. Which I assume... Because I'll never forget the first time I drove a four-wheel drive. I mean, for the first 2 hours, I hated it. It's like, I can't get used to this. And then once you catch on, it's like, you couldn't give me a tractor now that don't pivot in the middle. That's just crazy. So I always wondered how them... Do they ride good? I mean,
they ride fine.
No kidding.
Yeah, they ride nice. I mean, way better than the 1086.
Right.
I got no beefs with 2+2.
Is that basically a 1086 or a 15, whichever cab, rear end, whatever? And from there
back so, 33s, 35s, 37s is a 1086. The back half of a 63, 65, 67 is more like a 3688.
I'll be done.
Where it shifts correctly, et cetera, et cetera. The cab's basically, it's the same cab, but they move the shifting back to the right where it ought to be, and so on and so forth. But, like I said, you weren't buying a front wheel assist that was really worth the shit back then.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody had a front wheel assist that was really all that great. They didn't turn short. They were kind of cumbersome. This, that, and the other. That was ahead of time on that.
I mean, what was IH's, like a 52, 5488 would have been their first, what I would call big. I mean, I know you get a front wheel assist on a 1466 at one time, but I mean, that was
they were popular. I mean, nobody bought it back then.
But probably like a 5488 would have been one of their first.
Been the first widespread front wheel assist.
Yeah, exactly. And them were a few and far between around. I mean, even the 5200 series tractor alone wasn't that popular in this area.
They sold pretty good numbers of those, considering it was the 80s and they were going down anyway, but not that many front wheel assists.
Right.
Exactly. And I love them. There's not a cooler looking tractor than a 50 series front wheel assist.
Right.
I mean, those things look awesome.
Right. I only know of one that's about 7-8 miles from here. And outside of that, though, when I was a kid, there was a lot of 1086s, a lot of 1586s. But that 52, like you say, it got into the 80s far enough, and they were going broke that there just wasn't.
Well, the front wheel assist wasn't super popular.
No, it wasn't.
It just hadn't made its way into the market yet.
Yep, it's funny because I was helping a neighbor here. That's probably been 2 years ago now, and he's got a 5288 on his grain cart, and he was having me just pull it around the barn lot there. And I hadn't been in a two-wheel drive tractor in so long. I'm used to front wheel assist that even in the barn lot, you don't have to push the brake to turn. They're just going to grab and turn. Now the field's different, but I'll never forget that. I was trying to turn. I mean, the front end was just sliding the whole time. I'm like, God damn, I ain't drove a two-wheel drive cab tractor in so long. It was just nuts to me. But
yeah, we had a 5288. We traded grain carts. I traded grain carts, much to my dad's dismay, for a little bit there. We had it on a 5288 two-wheel drive, and it was muddy. And it got muddy right after I traded. It wasn't muddy when I traded, but like the day I brought it home, it rained the next day. It was muddy all the rest of the fall. So you'd have to blow up to the wagon or the truck, whatever, kind of slam the brake, try to swing it because you couldn't stop.
Right.
Swing it, get part of the load off, and then because the field was mud, but the lane was solid, and then you could swing it around and go ahead and top it off. And he's like, I told you that cart's too big. It wasn't too long after that we got a Magnum.
Yeah. I tell you what, though. Of course, being a kid, everything that's new is cool and neat and whatnot, but I will still say to anybody on this planet that the 71, 7200 series Magnums, even the 89s, was the most durable tractor ever put on this planet. And I'm not saying that the John Deere 8000 series wasn't, but just something about them Magnum tractors. I mean, them things
are pretty tough. I mean, if you talk to any red dealer, they will tell you that tractor about broke them.
Yeah.
Because there's no service work on it.
Exactly.
We're starting to see them show up now.
Right.
But back then, they just didn't really cause any trouble.
I got a cousin, that was a dairy farmer. He bought a brand new 7110, and I think it was the year they come out even. I mean, it was it was one of the newest front wheel assist case A tractors ever in this area. 7110 on a dairy farm. That thing was hooked to a shit spreader, and I don't know that it ever got unhooked. And the last time I talked to him, like 2 years ago, that thing, I thought he told me had 12 or 13,000 hours on it and had never had the hood off that tractor.
Yeah,
never.
I can believe
Change
that.
oil in it and go. I mean, it just, nothing. They never touched it.
They were tough. And IH doesn't get necessarily full credit for, that tractor was done. They had it done. Yeah, they put a case hood on it at the end to make it look like a case, but they had it done prior to that. I can show you some pictures of a 5048 with the fenders, the side console, all that. Yep. But they don't get full credit on that. But those things were done and tough. And truthfully, if you look at the rear end housings where the hydraulic pumps mounted, this, that, and the other, they still base that off current production tractors today are still based off that tractor from 1982, 3, 4, 5.
Exactly.
They were ahead of their time on that.
And it was cool to go from a tractor that you had to clutch and jack with 2 levers to get it in gear and always grinding gears and this and that and torque and whatnot to where you just had 18-speed full power. I mean, it was neat.
The funny part about that is, my dad's theory always is that John Deere always built what farmers wanted and IH built what farmers needed. But let's face it, you don't buy what you need, you buy what you want.
Right, exactly.
Which is probably how they've made it. But they had the full single lever power shift done in the 50 series, and somebody in marketing or higher up the chain said, no, farmers aren't ready for that. We don't need single lever power shift. We'll go ahead and give them the side by side.
No kidding.
1-speed power shift, basically, whatever. And that's good enough for them.
I'll be dang.
But it was also the 80s. They picked a poor time to retool.
Right.
Had they done that prior, let's face it, I'm as red as they get. 1086s suck.
Oh,
it should have never been produced.
At
bare minimum, that should have been a 3688 style tractor with the cab done correctly, because nobody wants anything that's just on the left.
Right.
I get it. There's,
Yep.
It's just not a good idea. But they had a bunch of that stuff. They had CVT back then. Nobody knows what happened to that tractor. It got cut up and salvaged and taken out of, nobody knows what happened to it.
No kidding.
They had all that.
Yep.
Way ahead of their time, but the 80s hit, and if you could sell 8,000 tractors a year, or 8,000 tractors of that model, you're doing pretty good.
Yep.
Which
that's where I will say, as far as comfort in the 80s, I do think Deere had them somewhat. To me, a 1086 was an all-around awkward tractor to even drive. The controls were laid out goofy. It didn't just kind of fit. And I'm by no means a fan of John Deere Soundguard tractors. I mean, you guys have seen that on TikTok. But at least when you sat in it, you did feel somewhat comfortable, where a 1086 to me was just, whoever came up with that should have been fired immediately. That was the worst design of a tractor ever put on this planet.
Well, I've always said I would have liked to been above them in IH at that time, and we would have modded their car while they were busy doing work, and their car would have shifted on the left next to the door.
Exactly.
And the doors would open backwards and see how they like.
Exactly. Yeah. The whole thing was a train wreck. It truly was
a train wreck from beginning to end. I mean, it was, their mantra was, it rides like a horse. I don't know if you've ever ridden a horse. Horses don't ride that good.
Exactly.
There's a reason we switched to other stuff.
Right.
But part of it is on the ride is tractors get heavier, they ride better, right? Because it's hard to balance more weight.
Right.
But if you weighted them down, then you had other issues, so on and so forth. I could go on and on about what 1086s should have been and should not have been. Now, that being said, as a little kid, going from an open station tractor to a 1086 was a pretty big day for Nick.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that quite a bit. I remember I slept hours behind that seat. I look at one of those now, I'm like, how did I ride with anybody? Exactly. And then, Dad turned me loose with it, and I'm running. I'm like, I'm in high cotton. Now I got air conditioning. I got a radio I can hear. The old fender tractors, your brother can hear the radio three fields away better than you can hear it in the same field.
Exactly.
It's like, this is spectacular. I loved it. But by the same token, like I said, we were a Heston dealer back then. We had a lot of Heston, still got one. And it's like, all these problems that I see that Deere had and IH had at the time, it's like, yeah, I'll take my Heston. Yeah. I realized they weren't near as popular as either one of those, but I'm like, the doors open correctly.
Right, and I've been in yours, and that was a neat cab for the day.
Way ahead of its time.
It was.
Way ahead
had the throttle over on the side.
Foot throttle.
Yeah.
Which you're not getting in an IH till...
Or a Deere.
You're not getting in an IH till you get to the MX series. There was a few in a Magnum. I mean, they were available back in the 06 series, but nobody had one.
Exactly.
Just a lot of things on that. That Heston cab is far and away superior from Deere and Case, in my opinion. But
it is.
It is what it is.
It is.
And they had good power. We always kind of marketed them as IH motor with a Deere rear end.
Right.
Because they didn't have rear end trouble, and they had great motors.
Exactly.
They don't burn much fuel, start good, they run good. To this day, all those little ones we sold never have had an engine apart. Right. Those, they run forever.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that's what's funny, because, I've literally been all over this country, and I mean all over this country. And without sight of you guys being a Heston dealer, there was probably more Heston tractors in this area. And I'm talking big tractors. For those of you who don't know what a Heston tractor is, I mean, we're talking 200 horse tractors.
Yeah.
And And you guys sold them. There was front wheel assist, 2-wheel drives, cab tractors. Then they even had little loader tractors for the dairy farmers, whatnot. But everywhere I've ever been across this country, and I'm not saying they're not out there, but you never see a Heston tractor anywhere.
They're very regional. I mean, of course, they didn't have a ton of dealers, this,
right.
that, and the other. The ironic part of that is we get made fun of back in those days. And then, because Fiat owned them.
Right.
Oh, I'm not buying this, I'm not buying that, blah, blah, blah. Now, Fiat owns Case, nobody says a word.
Exactly.
They're buying them now.
Right.
They just don't know it.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And what AGCO, I think even if you get a new AGCO condition mower or whatever, up until a few years ago, they said Heston. I don't know if they still do or what.
Yeah, I think there's a small sticker still. They're Massey Ferguson by Heston or
whatever. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, yep.
Or
sure.
Heston by Massey Ferguson, whatever it is.
Now, Heston, since we're kind of on the line of, I don't know if you call it short line tractors, Big Bud, Steiger, all this, Heston and whatnot. That was an Italian company?
Italian. Fiat.
Okay.
Fiat owned them, and they partnered with Heston, the hay company from Heston, Kansas. And they sold tractors under the Heston name up until about early 90s. The last ones, they dropped the Heston name. They were still Heston Brown, but they just said Fiat on them.
Really?
And those tractors were awesome.
Really?
The last ones. They never released the big one. But the last small ones that so they made an F-130 would have been as big as they ever made in the States. I think they might have had the big ones in Europe, but they never released them over here. Those cabs were far and away better than what you were getting at a green or red dealership.
No kidding.
But they didn't sell very many of them.
Right. And yours is a 1580, is that right?
So ours is a 1580 Power Shift, which they only made 10 or 15 of.
Oh, wow.
They made a ton of 1580s, but the next series that were replaced that would have been the 160-90s, 180-90s. But then those you could get in Power Shift or 16-speed with a shuttle.
Right.
Which, where else are you getting a shuttle in 180 horsepower?
And you know what?
Right?
Just before I even forget to think, that would make an awesome TikTok video. Because think about it. I mean, how many people listening to this now have ever seen a Heston tractor, let alone that's what, 200 and some horse? I mean,
everyone we sent out, because those motors made power so easy.
What motor? Was that a Fiat?
Iveco.
Okay,
which is the same thing you're buying from your case dealer now.
Okay, there you go.
Only way better pre-emissions, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure enough.
494 cubes in the big ones. Every one we sent out went out of 230 horse.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. So,
which was a lot in 1985.
Yeah. So how many people listening to this have seen a 230 horse Heston tractor that, well, like you said, so this Power Shift, there was only 10 of them ever made?
10 or 15 of the 1580 they released. They were not prototypes, but they were like pre-production.
Exactly.
So they were hand-built, put in there, and so at 1,000 hours, they took your tractor back, they give you a new Power Shift, and they took that one back in to inspect.
No kidding.
So I think ours has 1,800 hours on it, 1,900 hours.
Wow.
So the Power Shift's got 900 hours on it.
Unreal.
Give us a new one on or whatnot. They were pretty way ahead of their time. I mean, they really were. Even the non-Power Shift version after that, like I said, you got 16 speeds in a shuttle.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not getting that anywhere else.
Right.
The gear shifts aren't in your way. They were laid out pretty well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because like I say, outside of my immediate area, I've never seen Heston tractors anywhere else in this country. And I know they're obviously out there, but you're not driving down through the interstate in Kentucky and see a Heston tractor working ground. I mean,
it was pretty regional. There was a lot out west, like Oklahoma, Colorado. It seemed like they were fairly popular. It all depended on what you had for a dealer.
Right, exactly. So if anybody listened to this, if you have a Heston tractor, we want to hear a comment on it. Just what you got. I'm just curious what it is, if you've had good luck with it. So what years were Heston tractors made? Do you know? I mean, was it from the 75 to 85? Or I
don't know when they went under the Heston name. They were Fiats before they became Hestons. And then when they merged with Heston or bought Heston or however that deal worked, I'm not sure. We picked them up in 82 and sold them, I'm going to roughly tell you 82 to 92.
Yep.
92, 94, somewhere in there.
Yep.
And then eventually they went back to Fiat name. And then ironically, once they bought New Holland, there was some brown New Hollands that were the same as like, you've seen them, the first Genesis tractors?
Yeah. Yep.
They made brown versions of those.
No kidding.
Not a lot of them, but they made brown versions of those.
Wow.
And then ironically, they made blue versions of Hestons, and they only sold them in, I don't know where all they sold them, but I know they sold them in Mexico.
No kidding.
My brother happened to be in Mexico and saw a brand new 180-90, but they rebadged it something else, but it was blue. It was a Heston tractor. The same thing we were selling 5 years prior to that, but it was painted blue.
No kidding.
I've never seen another one, but he had a picture of one for me. I've seen a couple of them on Tractor House, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah. Now, are Heston tractors still sold overseas, or has that all been done away with?
I think once they bought New Holland and Case, they kind of merged into that name. And
so they bought New Holland?
So Fiat bought New Holland first. Then they already owned Heston, or the majority stake of Heston, whatever. They bought New Holland. When that happened, they had the monopoly on the hay market, so they had to sell off one hay line. So they kept New Holland's hay line, regrettably, from my opinion, but whatever. And they sold the Heston hay line to AGCO.
No kidding.
And then later on, they bought Case IH. So Fiat's a huge company. I mean, they own Ferrari, Maserati.
I'll be darned.
Case IH, New Holland. They own, at any given time, I'm told, I don't keep up on it anymore, but roughly 200 companies in and out.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
They kind of buy and sell companies to a certain extent. But
and that Iveco motor, that's what you said in this tractor that you got. What year is your Heston tractor? I mean, that's probably an 85, 6,
I'll call it an 85, yeah.
Yeah, that's the Iveco motor that's being put in. I mean,
well, it's not the same motor, but
same company.
Iveco is a division of Fiat. Yeah, that's who makes the motors for Case IH today.
I'll be dang. So this ain't some short line motor in this thing that got scrapped and you can't even, find anything about it.
Well, so we never had much trouble with it. If you can get that thing to burn over a half gallon an acre, you're doing something. I mean, that's the most fuel efficient tractor I've ever had.
No kidding.
It'll run forever.
Wow. Well, I know I got a neighbor up there, farms right by us, and I think he bought it from you guys. It's a 160/90 front wheel assist, and because actually that thing, it is set in the corner of his shed, all tore down. I don't remember if he had motor trouble, whatever, and it's set in his shed forever. And finally, about 2-3 years ago, I seen it out one day, and I texted him. I said, "Damn, you got the old Heston going." And he texted me back, and I think he told me that thing had 15,000 hours on it or whatever.
So.
And whatever it was he done to the motor wasn't nothing major. He just backed it in the shed, and he had several other tractors. He just never got around to it. So I mean, it wasn't like he had some rear end trouble and couldn't get parts, or he just simply hadn't gotten around to fixing it. But she's still running today.
Yeah, they were tough. I mean, all those little 60, 70, 80 horse tractors we sold. Never gotten an engine of any of those.
Well, I mean, my cousin, the dairy farmer, he literally ran it till he broke it in half. I mean, literally broke the son of a bitch in half and picked it up in 2 pieces and put it on a trailer.
Running across chisel plowed ground crossways with a full loader bucket that they welded extensions on. Yep.
Yep. But that thing had a massively hard life.
Yes. But the engine still ran. I never did tear the engine up in one of those.
Yep. So, what a deal. But we're going to have to cut this off right here. I mean, this has been an awesome conversation talking about these short line companies, the different tractors out there. We want to hear from everybody. If you got a Big Bud, a Steiger, a Versatile, a Heston, any of that stuff, be sure to drop a comment. I love hearing about these companies that had super awesome products, but never got as big as Deere or Case IH or any of that kind of stuff. It's just so cool learning about their history and, the people that have still got them and what they love about them, hate about them, all that good stuff. But, we're going to stop right here. We'll pick it up next time. Go follow Nick on TikTok, in McCormick 1466. Maybe we can talk him into doing a video of this Heston, show you guys what that's all about. But, we'll pick it up next time right here. You're going to be hearing more from Nick. He's going to be my co-host, I think, and we're going to see how this all works out. So thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next time. And until then, have a beer for us.